Good evening. You are here courtside with Carmen B. There is no lawman here today. He is still recovering, and we wish him a speedy recovery. And he should take some time to rest so that he can come back healthy and ready to debate here on Courtside. I would remind you that Courtside is an educational and an informational program. We encourage our viewers to post your comments or your questions in the chat, or to text them to us, and we will answer them. Again, the answering of any questions does not create an attorney client relationship between any viewer and myself, but please feel free to let us know the questions that you have. Today, this week, uh, the funeral of Jalen Walker was held. I believe that was on Wednesday. He is the young African American man that was killed in Akron, Ohio, just before the 4th of July holiday. And he was killed by law enforcement officers. He was killed while he was running away from the officers, unarmed, and the officers shot him. I believe now the medical examiner is saying today at least 46 times. We know that they expended far many more bullets towards him. And we would just like to say it is the loss of a life of another African American male at the hands of law enforcement, and this has to stop. May he rest in peace. May his family have some comfort. Now, we want to talk about something that I think is relevant to that issue, and there is a new Arizona law. I believe it is House Bill 2319 regarding the recording of police and making it a crime for you to record police in Arizona from closer than, I believe it is, an 8-foot distance, and that if you are requested to stop by law enforcement, that you must stop recording them. They're claiming that the reason for this law is they don't want people impeding in the investigation that law enforcement officers are conducting. Not quite sure how they came up with the magical number of 8 feet, or how officers are going to determine if someone is 8 feet away from them and recording, or whether that person is actually 8.5 feet or 9 feet. There is an exception for if you are the person that law enforcement is actively engaged with. So if they are detaining you, if they are conversing with you, then you are allowed to record them. The problem that I see with that situation is that officers, a lot of times, are recorded doing the misconduct, usually by someone else other than the person that it is happening to. And that may be because they didn't have time to get to their phone. The officer got them out of their car before they could start recording. Or the officer had them place their phone back in the car, or caused them to drop their phone. So it is very important that other citizens be able to exercise that right to record the officers and their actions. Now, the issue is this law going to be held as constitutional? And now that Arizona has passed this law, are there going to be other states that pass similar laws in order to protect law enforcement? Now, I'm not aware of a lot of complaints from law enforcement officers saying that they feel threatened by someone who is merely recording them. Um, because most people who are recording from a distance, but they want to be close enough where they can see what is actually being done to the person that is being detained. They also want to be close enough so that they can hear, and so that their recording device can capture what the officer is saying as well. Because a picture is worth 1,000 words, but you also need to hear what is that officer saying when you are watching his actions during that interaction, or recording his actions during that interaction. And unfortunately, recording officers' misconduct is not oftentimes enough. There was just an article I read about a young man who was detained, and I believe the original detention was in, I believe it was March of 2020, where he was detained by an officer who said that he was smoking in an area where smoking wasn't allowed, and that he was standing in an area that required you to have a fare. Um, Unfortunately, the man explained that he lived nearby, and you physically see there's someone who recorded the officer shoved the young man and then push him a second time, and then the officer arrests him for resisting arrest or for assaulting an officer. At no point in that video did that occur. The officer was then, charges were later, the charges against the young man were dropped, or the district attorney decided not to pursue those. But they did pursue charges against the officer, and that case went to trial. Unfortunately, a jury determined, despite seeing that video, that the officer had, and in fact, the officer was not charged with assaulting the young man. What he was charged with was filing a false police report, because he had claimed the young man was smoking, and there was no indication of any smoking that was found. There were no cigarettes, there was no lighter, there was no vape pen. And he additionally had claimed that the young man was in an area that required you to have a ticket fare for something like the light rails. And as it turns out, the area where that contact occurred was not an area that required you to have that ticket. But at any rate, a jury of 12 people decided that that officer was not guilty of filing a false report. Now, regarding the recording of officers, they say that it's so that people don't interfere with the officer's investigation. Well, most states, if not all of them, already have laws on the book that prevent an individual from obstructing an officer who is engaged in his duties. So, this additional requirement regarding being 8 feet away is sort of unnecessary, because if the person, whether they were recording or not, was obstructing the officer in his duties, they could be arrested. So there was already sufficient law on the books. I think, again, this is an example of conservatives pushing the envelope to see what they can get passed, and then whether or not it'll be challenged, whether or not other states will pass similar laws, and whether or not the Supreme Court will make some kind of ruling or finding regarding that. Here in California, you can film officers. Again, it goes without saying that you can't obstruct them, because that is already on the books. But you can still film them. For our viewers and citizens, American citizens who reside in Arizona, make sure that you stay that distance away, but that you still record officers when you see them interacting with other citizens, because sometimes that is the only thing that deters them from behaving in a manner which is more aggressive with the citizens that they are contacting. So continue to record officers. Do it from the distance that is required. If your state passes a law that requires that you be a certain distance away. But also remember, we live in an age of digital cameras. You can zoom in and get a close up view, even though you are that 8 feet away. So remember that. Remember that your cameras have a zoom feature. Use that to get a close up view without being close up in order to capture that officer and his conduct. So again, continue to record, because we need to capture these officers when they're committing misconduct, and we need to capture video of these officers, because sometimes that is the thing that deters them from committing misconduct. I specifically remember an occasion where I was with a colleague of mine outside of church. I think it was after church, and there was a gentleman in the alley who was probably an unhoused individual, probably had mental health issues, and was behaving in a manner that, if he was in his right mind, would have been a violation of the law. But it was clear that he needed some mental assistance. And someone called the police, and officers responded, and we began recording. And I think that is the thing that deterred, especially a young officer that ran up on the scene, from doing or causing physical harm to this young man. Now, as I said, Lawman is not here today for our usual debate on the issues. So I'm going to be focused more on questions that people have sent in, as well as any questions that are listed in the chat. So, one question from a viewer was regarding search warrants, and the issuance of search warrants, and what officers can do when they have a search warrant. One, if officers show up at your residence and indicate that they have a search warrant, the first thing you want to do is to ask to be able to see that search warrant before they begin the search. Now, sometimes what will happen is officers have already obtained a search warrant, they have a copy, and they can show you right then and there. Other times, officers may be looking at I'm looking at a comment regarding the term that I used in order to deter officers from misconduct. And the viewer stated that basically they would prefer the word dissuade officers from engaging in harmful or negative contact towards the person that they are interacting with. Regarding the search warrant, so there are times when the officers will have the search warrant with them. There may be other times when they are actually seeking a person. Maybe they have an arrest warrant, or they're seeking that person as someone that they want to speak to. They may not initially have an a search warrant. They may enter the house to try and serve this arrest warrant if they believe that and have information that the person is present in that location. They may see something that then causes them to request a search warrant for the residence. Know that you do not have to consent to a search of your home if the officers do not have a search warrant. You can tell them and refuse to allow them to search your residence. And you want to state that, and you want to state that clearly. If they do have a search warrant, what they may do is they may have everyone exit the home, or they may have you sit in a location of the home, such as in the living room on your couch, while they are searching for whatever items are listed in the search warrant. Again, they are allowed to search only for the items that are listed in the search warrant in places where those items might be located. Once they search the home, or while they are searching, sometimes the officers will attempt to engage you in conversation. You are not required to speak to them. You're not required to answer questions about who is at your home, who has been at your home, what items are in your home, whose room or what person sleeps in a particular room. You are not required to answer any questions that the officer is asking you. Now, it may seem to the average citizen that the officer is just making light conversation, but what you must understand is that the officer is always in investigative mode. Therefore, he is actually gathering information when you answer those questions. So when he says that, oh, is this your son's room? Is your son the only person that utilizes this room? Know that the officer is gaining intel. He is likely going to list your answers in his report. And even if he doesn't list your answers in his report, what he is going to do, or what if he is wearing a body cam, those answers are being recorded. You don't have to interact with them. That doesn't mean don't cooperate in terms of if they have a search warrant, allowing them to execute that search warrant. But you don't have to provide any information for them. A lot of people don't seem to believe or understand that they can sit mute, meaning not saying anything, on their couch or outside or whatever the designated area is, to wait for this search to be completed. The other thing is, if the officers don't have a search warrant, a lot of times what they will do is sort of kind of threaten you with the fact that they will get a search warrant, right? Well, if you don't let us search, what we're going to have to do is freeze this scene and get a search warrant, and that's going to take hours. You're going to be inconvenienced. Let them get the search warrant, because either one, they have the probable cause for the court to grant the search warrant and they'll be allowed to search, or two, they actually don't have probable cause for the search warrant and they're just trying to threaten you or convince you that they do, so that you just give up and say, okay, well, if you're going to get a search warrant anyway, come on in and search. Don't give up your Fourth Amendment right in that way. You have a right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, and unless a judge has reviewed their affidavit requesting a search warrant and determined that there is probable cause for that search warrant to issue, they don't have a right to search. You don't have to let them search. Another viewer sent me a video of a one viewer sent a video, and it was of a gentleman who was in his vehicle. It appeared to be maybe outside of a gas station waiting for his friends who were inside of the gas station. And he was a veteran. I believe he stated he had served like 3 or 4 tours in Iraq. And the officers approach his car and they ask him to let his window down. And he has his window cracked probably about 2 inches. And he says, you know, well, what is this about? And the officer tells him, well, the other night or a couple of nights ago, someone uh, uh, there was a shooting, and your car is similar to the car that we think was involved. And the gentleman said, well, you have no reason to believe, no reasonable articulable suspicion to believe that I was engaged in any kind of crime, and therefore I am not going to provide you my identification. It also, in that instance, appears that the officers had already ran his license plate, determined his identification, and didn't actually need him to provide identification, but they continued asking him. He refused to provide the identification. The first officer then said, well, you're obstructing and I'm going to arrest you. And he said, no, I'm not obstructing your investigation. Provide me with more information about why you think my car was involved, and then I can provide you with more information. The officer didn't, because it seemed fairly clear that the vehicle was not involved and maybe was just slightly similar, but this officer was pushing the issue. That officer then walked away, and another officer spoke with him and again kind of stated the same sort of thing. The gentleman continued with, I know my rights. You already have my identification in terms of you've called me by my name, and therefore I'm not going to provide you anything further. That one ended with the officer, I think, maybe talking to his sergeant, and then at the end, nothing else happened. The gentleman was allowed to drive away with no further events occurring. So that was a good outcome. Now, there was another interaction that a viewer sent me, and I'm sorry, I see a comment from a viewer asking, what does a genuine search warrant look like? And so he says, remember that one movie where Denzel faked out Macy Gray with a Chinese takeout menu? So a search warrant, number one, is going to state search warrant at the top of it. It's going to list whether it can be executed in the hours after 9 p.m. It is going to be signed by a judge. The judge's name should also be printed on the search warrant or stamped on the search warrant in addition to the judge's signature. It is also going to describe the location to be searched. So if it is a house, it is going to describe the address of that house. It may talk about it should list specific items that are going to be searched for, such as if they're searching for guns or if they're searching for computers. It will also describe the areas that can be searched. If it's a house, that's usually going to be the entire house, and that's going to include any containers that are on the property, such as if there are garbage cans in the backyard or if there is a shed that is in the backyard. It will also state whether or not there are vehicles on the property that can be searched. So usually it will list the vehicle, it'll list the registered owner, and it will list the license plate of the vehicle. So if there are vehicles, let's say, of people who are visiting the property but are not listed in that search warrant, the officer cannot use that search warrant to search the vehicle. Another question from a viewer is, can my wife consent to the cops to open my safe if she doesn't have the key or the combination to it? And no, if she does not have access, or and access would be she doesn't have custody of the items in there, certainly if she doesn't have the combination, if she doesn't have the key. So no, she cannot, because that's something that she has no access to. You've purposely taken steps to prevent her from being able to access that item. And the Denzel movie that was mentioned, I guess, was the Training Day movie. Another video that was sent to me by a viewer involved a woman who was in her vehicle. She had left, I believe it was a grocery store, and she was in her vehicle. There were children in the back seat of her vehicle. Not sure of the age of the children because they weren't actually depicted in the portion of the vehicle that I saw. But a law enforcement officer approached her and was asking to see her receipt. And she indicated to the officer why. She asked, "Why do you need to see my receipt?" He said that there was a clerk in the store who said that they saw her walk out with a bag, and they didn't know if she had been to a register. She again let the officer know that she had a receipt, that she hadn't taken anything, that she does not steal, and she offered with the officer to walk back into the store and look at any video that they had. And the officer refused. He told her that she was not going to go back into the store. So she is seated in her vehicle, and he keeps demanding to see her receipt. And she's saying, "I'm not going to let you see my receipt because I didn't steal anything. If they can show you a video of me having taken something, which I know I didn't, then that's another story. They're not going to be able to show you that video because such a video does not exist. But I'm willing to go back into the store with you." That was not good enough for the officer, and he kept insisting that she show her receipt. When she refused to show her receipt, he then told her that he was going to take her out of her car and arrest him for obstructing him in his duties. Now, mind you, the employee, at least based on what the officer stated, never said that they saw her take anything, just that they saw her with a bag. Well, I'm not quite sure what state that was in, but in California, we often, because now you have to bring your own bags or you have to pay for bags at the store. So going into stores, we're often walking in with our own bags. So merely seeing a person with a bag isn't proof that they had taken anything. And the officer knew that she had a receipt. So he could have gone to the inside the store. He could have detained her, gone inside of the store, checked with all of the clerks there to see which one of them had actually which line she had actually gone through, and he refused to do that. He then got her out of the car, and because she said, you're not going to arrest me because I haven't done anything wrong, he told her he was going to tase her. Now, why he went to using that amount of force rather than calling for a backup officer, I do not know. But he did. She got out of the car, and because she said, "You're not going to arrest me," he tased her in front of the children that were the car, and of course, getting tased, she fell to the ground. He then handcuffed her, had her face down on the ground, and then took her over to his police car. Now, in that instance, there was someone who was recording the entire interaction. So you see the entire interaction between her and the officer, including his misconduct in tasing her. She had not threatened him. She wasn't indicating that she was going to do anything to him. And she was cooperative to the point that she was willing to go back into the store with him. She just wasn't willing to show him her receipt. So those are two very different outcomes from someone asserting their rights. And so again, we want viewers to just be cognizant of the different outcomes that can occur. We want you to assert your rights, but we also want you to gauge the situation and the type of officer that you are dealing with, because there are some officers that are going to immediately go to force if you are not in compliance with them. Now, believe it or not, we have come to the end of another courtside show. Seems like that 30 minutes went by really, really quickly. Again, we appreciate our viewers. We are here every Friday at 6 p.m. Lawman and myself should be both be back here next Friday at 6 p.m. Again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to post them in the chat, to send them to us by text, or to us via email. Thank you again for spending your evening here with us, or here with me at Courtside, and forward to seeing you next Friday. Thank you.